One of the best looking games on PS4 and PS4 Pro, WipEout: A Mega Collection revives a much loved series for a new generation. Combining WipEout HD, Fury and 2048 in one package, developer Studio Liverpool's memory lives on with an excellent remaster. And thanks to the talent at Clever Beans, Epos Game Studios and Sony XDev Europe, it now runs at a full 4K with vastly improved visuals. Hi, it's Tom here, and today I'm looking at just how much of an upgrade this PS4 release is over the PS3 and Vita originals to make this the ultimate WipEout release. Right, first let's look at the score between PS4 and PS4 Pro. This one is simple. As you can see in this side-by-side comparison, the main difference really is in resolution, and visuals are otherwise the same for both. A regular PS4 renders at a native 1080p with 4x8 enhanced quality anti-aliasing, but PS4 Pro of course gets a 4x increase, a true native 4K push with motion blur disabled, or checkerboard rendering to 4K with it enabled. Now what's interesting here is developer Clever Beans got in touch with us to confirm there is no longer a dynamic resolution setup on PS4 Pro. Despite adverts saying it is a dynamic setup, the team actually disabled the feature in the final release, meaning PS4 Pro locked permanently at 4K. Great news all round, especially since there's no trouble hitting 60fps as a result. And on that point, here's a quick framerate test between PS4 and PS4 Pro. And yep, you guessed it, even on demanding circuits with lots of weapons, neither console buckles from 60fps, even at the starting grid. It's a rock solid line on either PS4 machine, with VSync always engaged. For a game that moves at such pace though, this really couldn't have slipped. What's more, 60fps isn't to be taken for granted in WipEout, and even the PS3 version struggled to hold that number at times, something we'll cover later in this video. So in other words, you get a decent deal regardless of which version you play. But the more interesting question is, how does the Mega Collection improve the HD and Fury releases on PS3 and 2048 on Vita? Let's start with the most satisfying visual upgrade first, showing the two extremes. On the left is the original Vita version of 2048 running at 544p using a dynamic resolution that adjusts based on load. And on right is PS4 Pro running at 4K of course, with a host of visual upgrades. Okay, admittedly it's harsh to see that resolution scale to this size, but remember Vita was the first console to get WipEout 2048 and it looked incredible on its OLED display at the time. It championed the hardware, and next to Killzone Mercenary and Uncharted Golden Abyss, showed a true high-budget title running on a portable console. Now, the resolution bump on PS4 Pro alone stands out massively, but that's not the end of it. Textures are reworked across the board to support PS4 Pro's 4K output, adding in crucial support for its HDR pipeline. You get higher quality maps, but also parallax maps, adding a three-dimensional quality to some surfaces. The turnout is obviously sharper, and really a necessary move in the push to higher resolutions. The rest of the changes are too numerous to count, but clearly the second biggest change is in lighting. Global illumination is used on PS4 Pro now, and the new materials across each circuit show off a brighter, higher contrast result. Amusingly, you can see large lens flares at the back of each racer on Vita, which didn't make the jump to PS4 Pro, and it's likely these were used on Vita to make the competition visible on the smaller screen as you race. In the end, the layout of the circuit is identical, but with screen space effects like bloom especially, the shift in lighting completely transforms the circuit. It's worth stressing a lot of geometry here is increased in polycount too, with far less aggressive level of detail settings compared to Vita. Okay, you've no doubt picked up plenty more changes by now, like the higher res sprite work for crowds in the stands, plus the new water shaders. And of course, shadows are rendered at a higher resolution now, with PS4 Pro letting all objects cast shadows across the ground, while Vita strips some out to save on performance. Slowing down to 50% speed, hopefully you get a good impression of the lengths Clever Beans went to spruce the game up for a new generation. It easily makes for one of the biggest contrasts in a comparison I've covered. A look at performance shows the biggest visual improvement of all. A jump from 30 to 60 frames per second on PS4 Pro. The fact we're doubling frame rate here makes the game much easier to control, but it's more than that. Even with a dynamic resolution to soften the blow, Vita had some frame rate drops into the 20 to 30 FPS region, which came bundled with screen tear as well. In fairness, there's only so much a portable release could have done to contend with so much fast action, and alpha effects from missiles are usually the culprit for these drops. At the time, Vita was certainly playable like this, but only on its own terms. For higher speed classes, you are at a clear disadvantage, especially in online crossplay against the PS3 version, which ran mostly at 60 FPS. It was a compromise you accepted though, and again you have to give a game like this credit for running on a portable machine. Next up, let's go for a slightly more balanced test. Here's the original WipEout HD running on PS3 at 1080p with a dynamic frame buffer. Next to PS4 Pro, inevitably the first impression is PS3 looks blurrier and duller. You do get a native 1920 by 1080 from the machine, but ultimately the reworked materials and lighting in the Omega collection makes a huge difference, arguably more than the push to 4K. On top of the new textures and geometry, a form of tone mapping is in place to give these colours extra punch, plus new effects like heat, haze and bloom make the cut. Again, it's not as stark as the jump from Vita, but this comparison is much more telling of how much work went into this remaster. It's also great to see weapons effects like missiles use higher quality sharper alpha this time. By cutting out the dynamic resolution and fixing to 4K, everything looks sharp even when firing on all cylinders with all races on screen. And really that's only made better by the push for high dynamic range, which if your TV supports it, heightens the contrast in a way that works brilliantly. In a similar vein to say No Man's Sky, WipEout can rely on darker environments with streaks of bright neon, which stand out vividly with HDR enabled. Brighter levels like Seoul are less impressive simply because there's inherently less range between white and black there, but overall the implementation on PS4 is excellent. Sadly, we can't show HDR directly, but the shift in materials to support it should still be apparent. In a nutshell, PS3 holds up well, but really Omega Collection gives us the game we thought we played all the way back in 2008, rather than the reality. Simply taking the PS3 game and bumping it to 4K would have been a disappointing move from Sony, and I'm genuinely pleased the asset rebuilding and extra effects on PS4 only add to the equation. Equally impressive is that performance gets a reasonable boost. So here we are, PS3 and PS4 Pro running some of the more demanding levels in WipEout Fury. And really, it was never too bad in the first place for PS3, but under the right conditions you could potentially get a hit to 45 FPS with tearing. That's all completely ironed out on PS4 and PS4 Pro, and try as I might to get any sort of drop below 60, it just didn't happen. It's all the more surprising that the game once advertised using dynamic res to keep frame rate in check, because even at a fixed 4K, there's no obvious drawback from what I've seen. Case in point, I even tried pushing PS4 Pro with fast split-screen racing. Here it is in action, and I can confirm you still get a native 4K with this mode at an unshakable 60 frames per second. Bearing in mind there's two separate viewpoints on geometry within every frame, it's surprising the engine still holds up as well as it does. Overall then, it's been almost a decade since WipEout HD first landed on PS3, an early sign of what the console could push to. Today Studio Liverpool may be gone, but the Omega Collection is a joyous celebration of all their hard work with some very well judged choices on how to go about remastering it. It may be a last gen game at its core, but running at 1080p 60 on PS4 or 4K 60 on PS4 Pro with a host of visual upgrades, in a way this series has never felt more cutting edge. That's all I have for the moment though. I'll leave you with some extra cuts of comparison footage I put together, but in the meantime, if you enjoyed watching this analysis, please feel free to give us a like or subscribe. And as ever, 4K content like this tends to look better from the original source file before uploading to YouTube. For that, we have a Patreon at digitalfoundry.net where you can find this and much more 4K goodness, exactly as we see it. In the meantime though, thanks for watching.